Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking some time today to join us. This is the Resilience Planning for Local Governments workshop. We really appreciate your time. It's no doubt a busy time of year and a busy Friday. And just really appreciate the diversity of folks from cities, counties, tribes, and other stakeholders coming from across the state together today. This event is hosted by Energy Trust of Oregon and Sustainable Northwest. My name is Bridget Callahan, and I'm the Senior Energy Program Manager here at Sustainable Northwest. I'm joined here today with several folks from Energy Trust of Oregon, but notably I'd like to just introduce Jenny Hall from Energy Trust to offer a quick welcome for the first 10 minutes here. We'll provide just a real brief overview of the event today. Of course, go over some logistics and housekeeping, and then we'll hand it off to our first speaker. Let me make sure I have all my Zoom functions on hand. There we go. All right. So we're here today to explore new opportunities to advance community resilience in the face of increasing natural disasters. And one of our primary goals is to connect you with the resources you need to advance your resilience planning and projects, whether that's funding, technical assistance, expertise, information, or just new connections. A secondary goal is for those who are here today who provide or deliver those resources to be able to better understand your needs, your barriers, and your opportunities. And then the last thing I'll point out in terms of kind of our overarching goals is we will be talking about community resilience and hazard mitigation planning more broadly, but we do hope that you all come away with some new inspiration and some ideas around how to leverage energy resilience in your planning efforts. As we know, energy touches all aspects of community resilience planning, mitigation, and recovery. So if this event does deliver on all those fronts, we would really like to know if there's value to hosting this event annually to continue building those connections, growing our resources, and scaling our strategies as a state. So here's an agenda for the day. We'll spend the first part of the morning with our opening speaker, followed by a panel presentation. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back for a few short presentations, followed by breakout discussions based on your indicated geographic region that you noted when you signed up. We'll reconvene after the breakouts and dig into some of the learnings, resource needs, and any top-level takeaways. And we'll have a brief wrap-up with Karen Chase of Energy Trust of Oregon before we adjourn around noon. At that point, we will leave the room open for folks that would like to continue to connect and continue the conversation until 12:30. Or most importantly, give you time to fill out a short survey that we'll be sending out in the chat box. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jenny Hall to share a little bit more about Energy Trust of Oregon.
Thanks, Bridget. Good morning, everybody. As Bridget mentioned, my name is Jenny Hall, and I'm a program manager with the solar program at Energy Trust of Oregon. I'm lead for our advanced solar portfolio of work, which means my work focuses on collaborating with our utility partners on projects and programs that balance customer energy resilience with the future of the electric grid. Can you go to the next slide, Bridget? Can you go to the, there we go. I'm going to get a chance to talk to you a little more later. So for now, I just want to welcome you on behalf of Energy Trust. And for those of you who may not be as familiar, Energy Trust of Oregon is an independent nonprofit organization, and we are dedicated to serving the 1.6 million customers of Portland General Electric, Pacific Power, Northwest Natural, Cascade Natural Gas, and Avista. Our work is focused on providing technical assistance and financial support to help customers invest in energy efficiency and renewable energy in their communities. And those projects can provide a number of benefits beyond bill savings each month. I look forward to talking to you a little bit more. Thank you so much for joining us today. Back to you, Bridget.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Real quick, a few things about Sustainable Northwest. We were founded in 1994. Our work focuses on forests, farms, and ranches, clean energy, water, and green markets throughout the throughout the greater Northwest. And through this spectrum of work, we help to ensure both rural communities and urban centers have healthy landscapes and resilient economies. Let's see here. So our energy program, where I spend most of my time, works to advance community energy resilience solutions. We do this through projects, programs, and policies, all to support community scale energy development and local economic development. So some examples of our work would include supporting community solar projects, on-farm efficiency, whether that's irrigation or our electric tractor pilot, energy planning, and we do convene a statewide network of clean energy experts and leaders across the state of Oregon called Making Energy Work. This comprised of folks who are working on the ground to advance community energy and resilience projects. So if anyone's interested in learning more about this work or the network, please don't hesitate to reach out to me for more information. So a few quick housekeeping items while we are still enjoying the Zoom virtual space. We understand that guests may need to come and go throughout the morning. We do encourage you to stay logged into this Zoom meeting if possible to retain conversations in the chat box or just be available to connect with others. If you have any technology challenges, please contact Jordan Drebin or Ben Dare, either privately in the chat box or by email. And I'll ask both Ben and Jordan to share their email address in the chat box. This workshop will be recorded. We'll have slide decks available after the event, and we'll also send out all the speaker information and contact information from the folks you'll hear from today. We will ask folks to fill out a short survey. We'll put in the chat box for the link. It won't take more than just a few minutes, but it's really valuable for us to understand how we did, if there's value in hosting this event annually, and also just get a better sense of where you have some resource needs. To help keep us coordinated after this event, we would like to go ahead and share the names and email addresses of everyone who joined us today. If you would not like your contact information to be shared with the group, that's perfectly reasonable. Just go ahead and let me know by the end of next week, and we'll make sure that you're not on that list. So if you haven't already done so, we'd like to invite everyone at this time to introduce yourselves in the chat box. You can include your name, your affiliation, and your location. And last and very important, please remember to mute your microphone throughout the event. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions and engage with speakers and each other, either through the chat box or raising your hand. But at other times, please remember to keep your microphone muted, especially when presentations are underway. So with that, we want to start by asking just a few short polling questions to warm us up and learn about who's here today. So first, we are going to ask everyone, what type of natural hazard are you most concerned about for your community? I hope folks can see that poll. Go ahead, we'll give this about 20 to 30 seconds to respond. Got just a few more coming in. Okay. Go ahead and close the poll. And let's see. So yeah, it looks like over half the folks in the room today are most concerned about wildfire. Several drought. I think it's also probably reflective of the time of year it is, but I'm curious of what the results would have looked like 5 years ago. Okay, I have one more poll right now. So hazard mitigation plans are required by each county, and they're also required to be updated every 5 years. So we wanted to know, how involved are you or your organization in the hazard mitigation planning process? And there's no wrong answer here. We'll give this about 20 seconds more. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to end the poll and share results. So it looks like we have a fair amount of folks that are aware of the process but not involved. Several folks that are involved to some degree. So we will be touching on hazard mitigation planning with the opening panel. And then the last question, touching on what we were talking about earlier as we were kicking off the event, is what's your COVID business dress code after roughly 14 plus months of a lot of us working in a virtual setting? And again, there's no wrong answer here. All right, I'm going ahead and end the poll. And it looks like we have quite a bit of diversity, a lot of animals and a lot of PJs. So thanks for humoring us on that one. All right, so we're going to kick things off with our first presenter. Michael Hoke is the Sustainability and Parks Coordinator for the City of Talent. His work supporting energy conservation was suddenly and tragically derailed as a result of the Albedo wildfire that was pretty devastating for the communities of Phoenix and Talent in September of 2020. And so Michael has been on the front lines of recovery ever since, and he's witnessed a fair amount of loss, but he has also compiled some really valuable lessons learned through a result of this experience. And we're really honored to have him join us today and talk about why resilience planning is so important and ground us into why this the work around resilience planning and hazard mitigation planning is just a really critical issue of the moment. So Michael, thank you for being here today. I'm going to hand the screen over to you to share your slides.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Bridget. Let's see. Can you guys all see my slides? Cool. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Sustainable Northwest and Energy Trust of Oregon, for hosting this. And also thank you all, everyone else for attending this conference. A little bit of background about me. I've lived in Oregon since 1999. I went to University of Oregon and studied economics there. Then I went to University of London and studied environmental and developmental economics, writing my thesis on the fracking industry in the US. After that, I was accepted into the RARE program. Go all RARE participants. I think there's a couple of you guys on this call. And I saw Papa Titus also attending this. And that's what originally brought me down to the City of Talent. Then after my second year of the City of Talent, I got hired on staff, which was about a month before the fire, actually. So why are we all here? So first of all, we all have an interest in resiliency planning. We see proactive resiliency planning as a value-added activity. Maybe you guys all want to better prepare your own community for their natural disaster if one occurs. Or maybe you guys are going through reactive resiliency planning right now and need more resources. Or maybe you saw the aftermath of our historic wildfire season last year and know it's time to act. Why am I here presenting? Like I said, I worked for the City of Talent. I got hired on a month before the fire and been boots on the ground ever since, and been doing a whole bunch of various tasks from community development planning to energy planning to running chainsaw crews to cut out trees. So for you guys that are unaware of the Albedo Fire, it started at September 8th last year. And it started on a day when we had high had red flag wind warnings. We had gusts of about 50 to 60 miles per hour in Talent. And we were at the end of the summer, so we're obviously in fire season. The Albedo Fire burned areas in Talent, Phoenix, and Medford, and it was about 3,200 acres and about 3,000 plus structures destroyed, and 700 of those structures were in Talent. But those 700 structures represented about 40% of our commercial and also residential areas. And then this picture is actually a picture I took 2 days after the fire when the AQI was about 500 plus. And I was supposed to be doing tree inventories and had to stop that day because I couldn't see the tops of trees because it was so smoky. So initially, we learned a lot of different lessons. The first thing was that the damage was very widespread with the high winds, with the really hot heat. It just was it was hard to control. The next thing that we kind of initially learned was that our staff was already working at full capacity before the fire. We're a small rural community, so a lot of city employees wear multiple hats and already have full capacity. And we kind of knew that this was going to overwhelm us with work right away. The next thing we kind of realized was there's going to be a lot of new processes that we have to deal with for recovery. I mean, i.e., where is all this wildfire debris going to go? What channels are these going to go? Where does the non-toxic debris go? Where does the toxic debris go? Where does the asbestos go? Where does the radioactive materials go? These are all things that we had to figure out. Another initial lesson that we learned was it was really important to get utilities back because it only destroyed 40% of our town, but we also had 60% of our town that were in their houses with no electricity, no natural gas, no potable water, no way to boil their water. And that's a big concern. And it was my first top priority was trying to help utilities get their utilities back up and running. And you can see at this picture right here is me with a chainsaw working on a nice 80-foot cypress tree that fell in the middle of the street. And our linemen from Pacific Power were trying to get down there, so I decided to help them out a little bit. The next lesson we learned was we needed help from other organizations. We knew that we weren't able to do this all in-house, all by our own. But the other thing we also learned is that everybody wanted to help, but we didn't know how. It was tough because right after the fire, we got contacted by multiple organizations and said, we can do XYZ for you, but we don't know how to do XYZ for you. Can you figure it out? So that was really tough to try to figure out, try to figure out how to ask for help, how to receive help, and how to manage this help. And then the next lesson that we learned was, mental and physical bandwidths were already near capacity for everybody in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. And then adding a natural disaster on top of it really crossed a lot of people's reaching point. So it's one of those things we initially learned that you had to be very cautious when working with people in the natural disaster zone or people affected by the wildfire. The last initial lesson that we learned was that there was many known unknowns. We knew we had to do a lot of things, but none of us had experience in doing it. We knew we had to talk to FEMA to try to encourage them to raise the natural disaster rating from a B to A. And we knew we needed to get data to provide that information. We knew we needed to communicate with all these different organizations. This is a picture of some of the stuff that I was working on. This is a big giant tree in the middle of a T intersection. And this was just one of the tens of thousands of trees that fell down during the fire. And if you think about this tree blocked one of our main arteries of our whole entire city. And so it kind of split our city into half because obviously cars aren't getting through that. So that's the picture previous of this was me working on this tree, trying to cut it out. And you can kind of see in the background of how some of the trees are still alive, some of the trees are dead, and there's no really rhyme or reason for why. In this picture, this is one of my favorite pictures. One of my friends took for a couple different reasons. I mean, looking at the car, you can see that only half of it burned and the other half is perfectly fine. Again, no rhyme or reason of why one half burned versus the other one. But then you can also kind of see in the background what we were dealing with and how we had to, or what we had to clean up. I mean, you can, that's used to be a house behind us, and now it's just metal and trash and debris. And we don't know what's in that debris. We don't know if it's toxic or not. How do we do testing? And these are all things that we initially had to find out. So today we're still learning lots of lessons. One lesson that we all learned is it takes a really long time to rebuild a city. It took half a day to destroy about half of our city, but we're 9 months into it, and we're finally seeing people get exterior paint on their houses, and finally seeing more and more houses pop up, and seeing more permits come in, and seeing FEMA come around and do mass cleanups. And this happened about 9 months ago. So this is going to be a long process to rebuild the city. And then again, something that we're still learning today is it's still a lot to handle mentally and physically for people on staff working in those wildfires. It's one of those things that I didn't realize how appreciative I was to leave this area to go fishing and see just green trees. That's something that I just haven't been used to for the last year. And a lot of those things has affected staff, but also affected our residents as well, and anybody else working there. The next lesson that we learned is that communication is paramount. I mean, as of right now, we're working with multiple different agencies, Energy Trust of Oregon, the state of Oregon, FEMA, Jackson County, the city of Phoenix, the city of Medford, all these contractors, all these ODOT and all this stuff. And we're all working together. So it is really important to get those communication channels down, know who you want to talk to, know who you're supposed to talk to, and know who to disperse that information to. The better your communication channels are, the better that you guys will do, or will speed up the recovery. The next lesson that I'd like to talk about is that Oregon is prone to natural disasters. I mean, we had wildfires this year in the northeastern Oregon. There were some floods happening, and then we also know about those earthquakes and that big earthquake that's supposed to come. I mean, as of right now in my county, we are going up to level 2 fire level today, and actually have 2 active fires already in our county. And we have also had lots of high wind. I mean, we had 30-mile-per-hour gusts yesterday, and with extreme droughts and low water levels, it's one of those things you have to know that, or be prepared for something to happen. The next lesson would be that sound energy management is key to prevent this from happening. It's one of those things that you really realize when we lost power, we didn't have a solar panel and a battery backup to produce some power for our residents. And it's one of those things we need to realize how much carbon we're putting into the environment, because obviously the carbon added to our atmosphere definitely worsened these conditions for us and made the wildfire more widespread. The last thing is that resiliency planning is a forefront issue right now, and it's definitely better. It's better to be proactive than reactive. Unfortunately, we don't have a choice anymore. We are in the reactive phase, but it's paramount that you guys can all try to take what you can learn from this area or from this conference and bring it back to your community and do that proactive planning, because all that proactive planning will benefit you quite a bit in the long run. Looking at my time, I went a little bit over my 10 minutes, but I just wanted to say thank you guys for your time. Thank you again to Sustainable Northwest and ETO and everyone here. Let's try to all work together to make ourselves and our neighbors more resilient to protect that Oregon we love. And then lastly, I just wanted to do a special thanks to, Bridget, to Karen, to Josh Bruce. There's probably a couple, I'm trying to see if anybody else, but I was gonna say both Karens from Energy Trust of Oregon. I reached out to each of you guys, and you guys provided support for us and provided resources for me. So I'm very thankful for that, and very excited to keep trying to work on talent to make it better. So thank you guys for your time. Oh, stop share.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate you being here and sharing that. It takes a lot to have kind of the wherewithal to go through the crisis that you did, and at the same time take note of lessons learned for other communities, and really appreciate that. And so Michael will be here. We'll share his contact information if you'd like to follow up with him. We will move over to our opening panel. So at this time, I'm going to kick this over to Adam Schultz. He's a policy analyst with Oregon Department of Energy, and he is going to be leading this next panel, and I'll leave it up to him to introduce our panelists. So Adam, thank you very much for being here.
Great, thank you, Bridget. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Good morning, everyone. As Bridget mentioned, my name's Adam Schultz. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Oregon Department of Energy, where, among other things, I'm the department's lead for energy resilience issues. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce and moderate our panel of distinguished guests for a discussion of incremental and approachable resilience planning for local governments. We don't have a lot of time, as you can see on the agenda, so I'll keep introductions here brief. Our speakers will deliver a few minutes of prepared remarks, and then we'll do our best to reserve time for Q&A. So if you can get your questions ready as you go along. I think, Bridget, you'll be monitoring the chat, if I have that correct. So if you want to plug them in there, that's as we go, that's a great way to do it, and we can come back to them at the appropriate time. So first, we'll hear from Mike Herriman, the state's resilience officer. Mike was appointed by the governor as the Oregon's first state resilience officer in 2016. In the position, he's led the developments of the governor's Resilience 2025 vision, which outlines next steps on key resiliency issues, fostered a strong resiliency network across the state, and established a 33-member interagency council to ensure government continuity. Next, we'll hear from Amy Bichant, the state's hazard mitigation officer. Amy's been in the position with the Office of Emergency Management since October 2019, where she's the liaison between local entities and FEMA for hazard mitigation assistance grant programs. And then we'll hear from Josh Bruce, Associate Director for Associate Director for Applied Research in the Institute for Policy Research and Engagement. Josh is responsible for management and oversight of the Institute's applied research projects, grants and contracts, staff and student research associates, and he previously directed the Institute's Oregon Partnership for Disaster Resilience. For the past 12 years, Josh has assisted communities throughout Oregon with natural hazard mitigation, disaster recovery, and community resilience related projects. So with that, I look forward to hearing from our distinguished guests, and I will look for your questions in the chat as we go. So I think we're going to begin with Mike Herriman.
All right, thank you, Adam, and thanks everyone. Thanks Sustainable Northwest and Energy Trust of Oregon for inviting me to today's conference online. You know, I'm just going to make some real simple comments about being resilient. And well, being resilient has different meanings across the communities. Strong relationships and trust are essential elements in local resiliency and community functioning prior to, during, and after a disaster. Resilience requires formal and informal governance structures that support the entirety of a community, and social capital and social connectedness are essential for effective governance. As risks and threats increasingly cross jurisdictional boundaries, communities across regions will need to strengthen their connections and relationships for effective response. So the Oregon Resiliency Plan was established in 2013 by the state legislature. It was a direct result after the 2011 Japanese earthquake, people known as Tohoku, the 9.0. The Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Commission, OSPAC, wrote the report. It's about 370 some odd pages, and it had a 50-year view. Chapter 6 of the report focused on energy. Some of the things that particular chapter at that time focused on the critical energy hub up in the northwest corner of Portland, the fuel hub as it's known. Also, there were some findings from the Bonneville Power Administration, and it came up with 10 recommendations. Since then, there have been additional studies on the fuel hub, and there's been some great work being done at the local level on what it means to be resilient for power. So Governor Brown's, as Adam mentioned, her Resiliency 2025 vision, she had a goal of getting 250,000 households 2-week ready. 2 week, that's a lot of households. And I think we can see sometimes during pandemic, we saw the runs on certain things, whether it's paper products to food and water and to shelter. We also saw a great impact during the 2020 Labor Day fires for our communities, while we still had COVID-19 in our backyard. So there's a lot of things been going on for the resiliency. Homeland Security has a program called Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA. I work with these folks pretty regularly, and it was really good to see. I did a little research on them, and yesterday they released an announcement. They're providing by the end of this summer a document called the Resilience Power Best Practices. And in it, they'll have best practices on power resilience levels for critical communication infrastructures related to facilities and sites, emergency and backup power generation systems, facility and site operations and maintenance, power transfer systems, energy storage and microgrids, and lastly, cybersecurity, physical security, and emergency management security. So again, that document will be out by the end of August. It'll be a public document, and I'd like you to keep your eyes out for it. Also, by the end of the summer, we're going to have our transportation resiliency assessment. Transportation and energy go hand in hand. We know after a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, our state's is in pretty bad shape, from the coast to the valley and over the mountains. So as we develop plans, mitigation plans, we decided to make sure we take a big focus on looking at our airports, our seaports, and some river ports up to the Port of Portland. So this document will also be a public document, and it'll have some recommendations. And we've been working steadily on these recommendations, trying to stay ahead of the actual release of the report. And I hope people will find that, because that ties into fuel and energy. We need our roads, we need fuel, and we need energy, and we need water to make Oregon more resilient. And when we talk about resiliency, what does that mean? There's a document known as the 333 Resiliency Targets. It means for the infrastructure, at 3 days, we need to restore emergency services at 90%. At 3 weeks, we need to restore our pre-disaster service level to 90%. And at 3 years, to improve infrastructure to a new normal. So as you heard Michael talk about the City of Talent 9 months into it, we'll probably be working recovery efforts on the wildland fires over the next 5 to 10 years across the board. Recovery takes a long time. That's why it's important to mitigate as much as we can, and you'll hear from other speakers. And then lastly, I just was asked to talk about a few bills in session right now that I think are still active. There's a House Bill 2021, which will require electrifying providers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with energy sold in Oregon. There's a 80% by 2030, 90% by 2035, and 100% by 2040. There's a House Bill 2722, which would direct the PUC to convene workshops on best practices regarding wildfires. There's a House Bill 3221, which would grant the PUC to authorize Oregon Renewable Options Program offered by qualified utilities. There's the Governor's Resiliency Bill, Senate Bill 288. And inside that, there's 4 parts to it. The biggest part I think I'd like to mention is we want to establish the unreinforced masonry seismic safety program with $50 million of lottery bonding for the first one. That's still in play. And then also Senate Bill 762, it's the Wildfire Recovery Bill. That's a bill I think it's more like a budget bill. It's not necessarily a legislative bill for agency. It's a funding mechanism. It worked out with the House Committee and the Governor's office on that. And then lastly, there's always the bonding bills. Bonding in Oregon are usually decided late in session, so we're less than 30 days in. The sign and die date is June 27th. But 2 bills to keep an eye on for bonding. For general obligated bonds, it's Senate Bill 5505, and for lottery bonds, 5506. And that concludes mine, and I hope I'll lead you over to the next speaker. So I'll take questions when we're all done. Thank you, Adam.
Great, thank you, Mike, as always. And just one quick note, just of something I know from what Mike was talking about there. Mentioned the 2722 bill will require the PUC to have workshops on best practices for anyone who's interested in that. They're actually already doing that. So they're out ahead of the legislation. That's one of the recommendations from the Governor's Wildfire Council. So if you are interested in that, I'd encourage you to reach out to the PUC or check out their website. And I believe next we'll go with Amy Bichant from the Office of Emergency Management.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint to follow along with. One moment, please. Okay. So good morning. My name is Amy Bichant. I am the State Hazard Mitigation Officer for Oregon. I manage, as Adam had stated, the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Grant programs for the state. I'm the liaison between local entities and FEMA Region 10. I do want to make note that these are the main contacts for OEM, but they're not limited to this. We are currently building out our staff, but I do want to make note that Joseph Murray is our planner within our section for hazard mitigation assistance. And he will be a good resource for you if you do not have a plan currently, or if you have questions regarding plans in general. Going on to the next slide. What is mitigation and its benefits? So this is the definition that FEMA has for hazard mitigation. The main takeaway from this slide is it could save up to $13 per dollar invested. There's an average of $6 saved per dollar invested overall. And I do want to make note when the slides do go out there in the top right corner, there is a PDF that goes into further explanation on those benefits and kind of elaborates and goes over some of the additional benefits of actually incorporating mitigation into what your local entity might be doing at this time. So the hazard mitigation grant programs are broken down into pre-disaster and post-disaster grant programs. I do want to make note of this because pre-disaster are actually annual grant rounds. Building resilient infrastructure in communities, which is also known as BRIC, and flood mitigation assistance, or FMA, are also identified as pre-disaster grant programs. All the way up to last year, we actually had pre-disaster mitigation PDM, as it's known, but we are now utilizing BRIC versus PDM. I do want to make note that all of these are hyperlinked and they will bring you to the FEMA website once you do receive the actual PowerPoint presentation. For post-disaster grant programs, we have Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, also known as HMGP, and Hazard Mitigation Grant Program post-fire. Those are typically tied to the fire management assistant grants that ODF manages for the state. So for last iteration, just for an example, we received 16 FMAGs, and for each FMAG, we actually got just over $629,000, which added up to a significant amount. And there's a slide that will show you that breakdown shortly. But I do want to annotate that there are two distinct funding streams underneath post-disaster. It can get confusing really quickly, but I do want to make sure that you understand that there are two options and opportunities underneath post-disaster. The post-fire, again, only occurs when those FMAGs are declared through the state. And Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is presidentially, federally declared disaster. Another takeaway from this is that building resilient infrastructure in communities is taking on a whole new approach to hazard mitigation. It's a more holistic approach, meaning microgrids versus just purchasing generators for backup power supplies. That's just one example of many. And at the end of this presentation, there's actually a link to a mitigation action portfolio that provides a really, really good breakdown of additional ideas for BRIC of previous projects that have been completed that would qualify for BRIC. There's also going to be a link to mitigation ideas to give you an idea overall of possible hazard mitigation grant program projects that might be out there that you might be interested in as well. The projects that are the programs all include kind of the same basic timeline regarding award. It typically takes 10 to 18 months for projects to be awarded. And it also takes a little bit more time to go through the pre-award process. So I do want to make note of that. So if you're looking for a quick fix to something post-disaster, hazard mitigation assistance is not what you're going to be looking for. You're going to be looking for other programs that OEM and other entities around the state manage. The only other takeaway is the cost share breakdown is typically 75%, 25%, and that's 75% federal and 25% local share. So that is consistent across the board. There are some exceptions underneath the pre-disaster grant rounds, which once those notice of funding opportunity hit, that information will be captured in those notice of funding opportunities. We do anticipate both brick and flood mitigation assistance, those notifications of funding opportunity from FEMA to hit around the August-September timeframe. And as soon as we get them within 7 days, we anticipate sending out statewide guidance accordingly. So who is eligible to apply for hazard mitigation assistance funding? It's mostly local public entities. There is an exception for hazard mitigation grant program for the post-fire disaster declarations underneath for private nonprofits. So if you're a private nonprofit on this call and you would like to learn more about hazard mitigation assistance funding, please reach out to me and we can try to schedule a follow-on call to kind of go in and explore certain options that you might have as a private nonprofit. Local entities can also support private homeowners and private businesses. However, private businesses and private homeowners cannot directly apply for funding underneath hazard mitigation assistance. The so what of the whole presentation is that you do need hazard mitigation, a natural hazard mitigation plan that is approved by FEMA if you're seeking hazard mitigation assistance funding. There is one extraordinary circumstances exception request that can be done if, say, you're working through a plan update currently and it won't be completed for a few more months, because you have to have a FEMA approved plan in place from the time of award. You have 12 months to get that approved. And it's very important that you're able to tie any of your proposals that you're submitting for funding requests to that natural hazard mitigation plan. That plan doesn't have to have verbatim the project you're trying to seek funding for, but you should be able to tie it to some of your goals or something else within that plan as part of the eligibility requirement as well. And so this is the current breakdown of open disaster declarations. Again, these are post-disaster grants only. I do want to make note, if you look over on the screen where there's a red circle underneath 4562, that's the current funding that we still have available currently across the state for that disaster declaration. That was the hazard mitigation grant program for the presidentially declared disaster on September 15th of last year. We do have the pre-application period open through July 1st. So I do want to make note of that. And there are 2 hidden slides in the slide deck that go way more in detail about potential projects that might be out there and the actual pre-application itself. So if you are interested in seeking funding, there are opportunities within the slide deck to kind of pursue that. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me at the SHMO email address that is provided on page 1 and in the chat box. The only other takeaway from this slide is that the winter storms from earlier this year, we do have 4599. That's the number you want to keep in mind. We have not received what's called a 30-day estimate for that, but as soon as we do receive that information, we will make sure that that gets sent out statewide. And that's what we're pending on at this time. We do anticipate just over $2 million, but we won't know that for sure until we receive that 30-day estimate, which we're anticipating in the next 7 to 10 days from FEMA Region 10. And then finally, there's a links page. There's several great resources that are connected to all of these links. Again, I want to overemphasize that it's important to kind of focus on a hazard mitigation plan implementation or upgrading or actually pursuing funding. For the funding that we do have available currently, we still have over 3.1 million available for plans specifically. So if that's something that your community is in need of, please reach out to us and seek funding opportunities accordingly. Pending any questions, I will go ahead and end my presentation and stop sharing and send it over to the next presenter. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Amy. Lots of excellent information there. And I encourage you all, if you aren't familiar with Amy and don't know her, to find a time to reach out and get to talk to her, because she's a great resource. So I'll turn it over to our final presenter here, Josh, and then we will hopefully have a few minutes left for questions.
Thank you, Adam. So yeah, I don't know about you guys, but some of this can feel a little bit overwhelming, right? I have to have a plan. I got, all these mechanics. There's these FEMA grant programs I'm not familiar with. I know we've got a number of folks on the call that are not emergency managers, right? You might be planners. You might be more familiar with energy programs. You might be more familiar with economic development programs, et cetera. And so how do you get all this stuff done? My job today is to kind of outline at least a couple resources that are available, particularly for our folks in rural areas that are already a bit capacity constrained. And the way I'm going to do that is talk a little bit about the natural hazard mitigation plans that you would have to have in order to tap these funds, so the planning process. Talk a little bit about expanding the range of partners you're bringing to the table to add things like energy to your natural hazard planning portfolio. And then finally talk about once you get a plan or have a strategy, how do you get this stuff implemented? I want to start all of this by conceptually just saying resilience is not something you add on. It's not a separate department. It is a way of doing business. And so that becomes fundamental to any community that's wanting to take on resilience as a goal, as an objective, or as a platform. It has to be enterprise-wide, and it has to involve as many constituents in your community as possible. Natural hazard mitigation planning. Amy just said you have to have a plan in place in order to tap any of these federal dollars. So how do you do that? Some communities will take it on themselves. They'll have their emergency manager or even their planning department. For example, Douglas County, their planning shop does their mitigation plans, but often it requires partnerships with an entity to help facilitate the process. And that's because it's complicated, and generally it's easier to have folks that do this every day and know Amy and the other folks at FEMA to navigate the process. So here are just some ideas. We do this kind of work in our shop. The Department of Land Conservation and Development has staff on hand to assist communities in developing mitigation plans. They will help you get the grant. They will help you facilitate the process, bring in the partners, et cetera. You can also reach out to councils of government. There are private contractors that do this work as well. And then I also want to acknowledge there are other universities in the state that have assets and capabilities to do this. So the bottom line is, if you need a plan done, and particularly if you're looking to push the envelope a little bit, for example, and add energy considerations to your mitigation portfolio, finding folks that have experience to help you navigate that process is encouraged. And again, there are lots of assets in the state to help you do that. The second piece is around partnership. So I like workshops and conferences like this where I see colleagues from different disciplines on the same call, because oftentimes mitigation planning is about talking to the emergency management community. Well, if we're going to talk energy, or if we're going to talk transportation or water infrastructure, it's really important to get those folks involved in the process. And I can tell you from experience, that can be challenging to do. I worked at the city of Eugene as a permit planner years and years ago. I helped the city update their mitigation plan. I couldn't get any planners to show up at the emergency manager's mitigation planning meeting. That's a problem, because planning and land use policy is a great low-cost way to mitigate impacts, right? And so I say that because expanding the range of partners is critical. You can look at that not only in terms of how you develop out your natural hazard mitigation planning committee, and it's generally FEMA is going to require you to do that, but you could also think about it in the context of standing up subcommittees. So say energy is where you are focused, get a group of folks that are interested in energy. They don't have to come to every mitigation plan meeting, but get them to provide recommendations on the facilities or the types of energy resilience you want to see in the mitigation plan. The other thing you can do is, if you're an emergency manager or something like that, take the folks doing energy or water or whatever, take them out to coffee and build the relationships. Because getting back to Michael's original point, it's really hard to do that in a post-event environment or something like that. Building those relationships ahead of time and up front is really critical. The last thing I'll say is your mitigation plan isn't the only one you should be paying attention to. Your community has a comprehensive plan, it has a capital improvements plan, it might have a community wildfire protection plan, a budget, right? All of those are great places to put mitigation or resilience strategy. Okay. Last thing, implementation. You've got a plan, you've got a list of, Mike said the state's plan is 300 pages, and if I recall, it's over 100 recommendations over a 50-year time frame. Where are you gonna start, right? Like, how are you actually gonna get any projects to ground? And that's where the implementation piece comes in. And for there, I just want to shout out all of the sort of NGO partnership resources that are out there. Let me use one example to illustrate the point. So I know we've got a bunch of our resource assistants to rural environments folks on the call. Titus Tomlinson is the director there. I strongly encourage folks to reach out to him to get capacity, particularly to your rural communities. We've had a multi-year partnership between Energy Trust, Spark Northwest, and Oregon Department of Energy, right, to get capacity to do feasibility studies for alternative energy and resilience building projects in communities. They can do site assessments for you. They can go out and try and find funding on your behalf, and they can get projects built. So once you have a natural hazard mitigation plan in place, the strategy for implementation goes back to, this is a not an additive thing, but a way of doing business. And the way of doing business is to bring more partners to the table to get that stuff done. I think the state of Oregon is uniquely positioned to take advantage of not only post-disaster money that Amy just talked about, but as FEMA is adding dollars into the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, tremendous opportunities to bring our NGO partners and our capacity building entities to the table to get that done. And with that, I'll stop. And Adam, hopefully we've got some opportunity for Q&A.
Great, thank you. So I will give folks time to get some questions into the chat, and I can get us started here. I think we're going to have a few minutes, and we're a bit behind schedule, but I think we'll run for 5 minutes here and try to get some questions. So please enter them into the chat. But first, I want to start with Mike Herriman from the governor's office. You mentioned the 2 weeks ready goal the governor has for 250,000 homes. I was curious, where are we with that goal, and are there examples of what local communities are doing out there to help their own residents to meet that kind of goal? Is there any kind of best practices, good examples that you know of offhand?
Well, thanks for the question. Okay, so we introduced that for funding for some resources to do this in the short session in February 2020 under our House bill. And as you know, the short session didn't last long with the walkout, so all the bills died. Since then we got hit with COVID, fires, and then the ice storm. It's still on the radar. We keep looking at, can we use one-time federal funding that's coming into the state? Or do we continue working with the nonprofits and just kind of like nugging it out until we find that happy medium? We need resources for a couple things: education and outreach, and not put this on the backbone of our community-based and our faith-based organizations. But the governor's vision would direct the Office of Emergency Management to establish an advisory council to bring those folks together. So what we've learned, 2 years ago, the council might have looked like X, but now with what we've understood and the focus that we're doing with racial justice, I believe that we can pull this off. We do need some resources to identify what that means for a community to be, or a household, because all households are different across the state of Oregon. So it's still in that visionary type thing. We're still looking for resources. So, it's not dead, but we just don't have the juice right now to actually pull it off. And that's the unfortunate part. However, the good part is after the June 2016 exercise we did for Cascadia, the state of Oregon decided, instead of being a 72-hour state, we're a 2-week ready state. So there is funding on that. Oregon Emergency Management does a really good job on their website and how they communicate that. And it proves that we have some Oregonians that are working on this. And it's not giving them funding, it's giving them a vision. And the vision of Governor Brown is to get 250,000 households prepared for any disaster, not just a Cascadia. So that's where we're at.
Thanks, Mike. And I was going to ask Josh a question here about, a lot of discussion of the RARE program and how they can help communities. And I was going to ask, how can folks get in touch with the RARE program? And I see Titus put some information in the chat box. So I don't know, Josh or Titus, if you'd like to pipe up and sort of just make sure everyone knows this information about how to get in touch with the RARE program. I think that's an important resource.
Awesome. Josh, thank you again for putting in the plug. If you are interested in learning more about the RARE program, I just dropped that link in the chat. I also would invite you to reach out directly. Also put my email in the chat as well. I should note that we just passed our deadline for community applications, so we wouldn't be accepting communities until this next service year. So we would be looking at applications coming in April of 2022. So we're a little ways out. That said, we are bringing some capacity to the wildfire recovery arena this year down in Southern Oregon, up the McKenzie and up the Santiam. And we've also been doing some great work within the COVID economic recovery arena with huge support from Josh Bruce and Bob Parker. So again, please feel free to reach out. There's also definitely potential to leverage some of the capacity that we're currently bringing to rural Oregon to help support some of your work. I also have to give a shout out to Bridget, Karen, the folks at Sustainable Northwest Energy Trust. They're also huge supporters of the work that we do. Thank you.
And Adam, if I could just add on to that, I mentioned other universities. So if you see in the chat, there's examples of folks at PSU helping with natural hazard mitigation and planning. And I'll say the way that our institute works is we have both on campus and then the off campus RARE program that Titus just mentioned. And so we bring student teams as well to natural hazard mitigation or just resilience planning in general. Alenka Robles on the phone, on the line today. She's managing a team working in Josephine County, specifically on solar plus storage with microgrids to help alleviate some of the energy system risks they have down there. So I guess the takeaway point for me is don't hesitate to reach out. And whether it's our shop or, like I said, a council of governments or anybody that's got fingers in a lot of different pots. Community economic development districts right now, we're doing a ton of work with them, and they are leading on regional and local resilience building. So don't hesitate to reach out to those organizations that tend to have lots of different ways to get the job done.
Great. I know we're short on time. I want to throw out one last question. And I think, Josh, you're probably best positioned to answer this, but others feel free to jump in. You mentioned kind of pushing the envelope potentially to add energy planning to your natural hazard mitigation planning. I'm just curious if you have any best practices or particular communities you feel are doing a great job that might serve as sort of a template or a good resource or example for other communities joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I mean, like I said, the work we're doing right now in Josephine County is gonna really push the envelope on providing resources. So in addition to direct support to the county, part of that project will be developing templates, informations, and sort of guidance that we're partnering with Oregon Energy Trust to get out, right? So in a specific sense, that's there. In terms of incorporating energy into mitigation and planning in general, though, I mean, I think there's a number of communities around the state, right, that are doing that. Lincoln County, Lincoln PUD, for example, has done some great work around seismically retrofitting substations and some of the air infrastructure. And I know that's a public utility or district, right, working with their emergency management land use planning leads in Lincoln County to get that work done. So they're a good example. I'm sure there are others, but I need another cup of coffee, I think.
Well, I don't want to take up more time, Bridget. I know we have other exciting topics on the agenda here. So I'd like to thank our panelists for a good discussion and wish we had more time for questions.
Yep, thank you, everyone. That was excellent. I would like to go ahead and announce we'll have a short 10-minute break or 8-minute break at this point. So let's plan to reconvene at 10:40 for our next presenters. So thank you, Adam. Thank you, Josh, Amy, and Mike for joining us. It's a really rich discussion. Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you again to our last panel discussion. Lots of great conversation happening in the chat box right now. So we are going to move to our next presenter. You were briefly introduced this morning, but I'd like to introduce Jenny Hall. She is the program manager for advanced solar at Energy Trust of Oregon and one of the key organizers for the event today. So Jenny, I'm going to let you share your screen and take it from here.
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Thumbs up, always good. All right, hi again, everybody. As Bridget mentioned, my name is Jenny Hall. I'm a program manager of the Solar Program at Energy Trust of Oregon. I'm lead for our advanced solar portfolio, which means that my work focuses on collaboration with our utility partners on projects, programs that balance customer energy resilience with the future of the electric grid. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the work we're doing to support customers and help them invest in energy efficiency and renewable energy can provide other benefits and support both community sustainability and resilience goals as well. As Bridget mentioned in her opening remarks, energy touches on all aspects of your local community planning efforts, and that includes hazard mitigation planning. The previous panel did a really good job of digging in on that. We often talk about the energy investments that Energy Trust supports customers and communities in making in terms of the energy being saved or generated. And since Energy Trust began our work, we are very proud of the fact that combine all of the investments that Oregon communities and customers have made have totaled together to be greater than the output of an average coal power plant, kind of like a clean energy power plant. It's a little harder to quantify some of the other benefits that those energy efficiency and renewable energy investments can provide customers and communities. And so we talk about those other benefits less often than we do the kind of more pure numbers. I really like this infographic because it describes some of those other benefits that families, businesses, communities receive in addition to the savings on the energy bill each month. Some of those examples there are the water savings from the work to pipe irrigation canals, the indoor air quality. There's a benefit you can get from investing in improving your HVAC or your residential air conditioning, not having to open up a window and put a box fan in like I have to do today, especially when the outdoor air quality is not so great. And in the bottom, we talk about how solar paired with battery storage can specifically help support resilient communities. So solar panels paired with battery storage at a home or a business, that is a type of microgrid. And now microgrid is one of those words like sustainability or resilience that has a different definition depending on who you talk to. The definition that we use here in Oregon is based on the U.S. Department of Energy definition you're seeing here, and it's pretty flexible. Using this definition, a microgrid could be a home or a building. It could be multiple buildings together in a campus, or it could be all the way up to a whole neighborhood. We really focus on helping customers in upgrading systems in their homes and their businesses. And so just being able to support a community and identifying those specific locations that are that would benefit from solar plus battery storage is something that we have been doing, and it's very directly focused on this energy resilience concept that we're talking about here today. Now, when we start talking about microgrids, I know that starts to sound a little bit like the Jetsons, like something that you don't see very often, and we certainly don't have a lot of examples here in Oregon. There are some reasons for that, and those reasons are a lot of the point of why we're pulling together this conversation here today to support communities understanding how to access funding resources and a lot of the reason why we're working with communities, some of the communities that are represented here on this call, to help them understand the opportunity. In Oregon, we have really relatively low electricity costs, including our demand charges are really pretty low. And in other parts of the country, you see electricity rates like our neighbors to South California or Hawaii or back east, electricity rates that are quite high, and they have time of use charges that are pretty significant. And those sorts of market factors really drive the adoption of battery storage and solar paired with battery storage, because it gives you an opportunity, it gives you a benefit to take electricity from one part of the day to save solar being generated in the middle of the day and move it to a different time of day to decrease energy costs when your bill might be higher. And in Oregon, we don't have those same factors that drive adoption. But what we do have is an increased need for resilience for all the reasons that Mike was talking about earlier. For all of the different scenarios that the different communities you've identified, electricity is important. It's an integral part to all of the other community lifelines, whether it's communication or water resources, or just keeping the lights on and your food cold. So while microgrids sound like a futuristic concept, it's only really the fact that we have some challenges in economics here in Oregon that we haven't seen the adoption driving up. And so trying to understand the value of that energy resilience so that we can support communities in tapping into those additional funding resources is something that we've been really trying to focus on. And just to show you that it's not completely futuristic, just over our southern border, probably not too far away from Karen Chase right now, in Humboldt County, California, the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe has an excellent example of a microgrid of a couple buildings that was installed not that long ago, and unfortunately, due to the public safety power shutoffs that have had to be called in California, been exercised several times, and fortunately for the community, provided some benefit. Pretty significant. Their estimates were that they supported 10,000 different members of the county by being able to provide resources just as simple as being able to power the gas pumps. So some of the work that we have underway here in Oregon, we are, as just mentioned, some of the work already with Josephine County that we're working with the University of Oregon on. We are actively working with Hood River County and Josephine County right now to understand how renewable energy microgrids, solar plus battery storage at critical facilities can fit into their normal hazard mitigation planning processes. So the normal planning that these communities, that many of you are going through now or in the near future, incorporating an energy resilience lens into those meetings that you're already having in order to make sure that you are able to access the FEMA grant funds that Amy outlined. And we've also begun conversations with several other communities, many that are represented here today, to identify ways to support them in accessing funds as well. On the slide here is some examples of some of the work that we have been.
Oh, Jenny, your mute went on.
I think you're still muted, Jenny. Let me see if I can do anything.
That's weird.
Oh, there you go.
Not sure how I muted myself with no hands, but I'm just that good. The slide here represents some of the work that we've been doing with Hood River County, again, specifically to identify how renewable energy microgrids fit in with the hazard mitigation planning process in an effort to be able to unlock some of those federal funds, like the funds from FEMA. As Amy described, FEMA has changed their funding process, their funding mechanisms, and so the Building Renewable
Infrastructure on Communities grant fund that's now available each year. FEMA is very excited about the idea of microgrids, but so far FEMA has never actually funded a microgrid. And so being able to do the work of fitting in the ability of a microgrid to support a community into the framework that FEMA requires to show a benefit cost analysis. This is all the kind of footwork we've been doing to make sure that Oregon communities, when they do apply for these funds, are successful. It's a pretty great opportunity to be able to access these funds. As Josh mentioned before, it's important when you're considering your planning processes to make sure you have all of the right people at the table and incorporate all the voices you can. And we really want you to consider Energy Trust a resource when you're thinking about how energy resilience fits into your planning processes. And with that, I will hand it back to Bridget. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you so much, Jenny. Any burning questions before we move on to our next speaker? Okay, well, again, the slides will be made available after the presentation. Jenny's contact information will be shared, so there will be other opportunities to connect. But thank you so much, Jenny, really appreciate that. So next, I'm pleased to announce our next speaker. It's Hood River County Commissioner Les Perkins. Commissioner Perkins has been a Hood River County Commissioner for over 20 years, and he's focused primarily on issues around energy, water, and forestry. He is a co-founder of the nonprofit Farmers Conservation Alliance and is currently the manager of Farmers Irrigation District, which delivers water to nearly 6,000 acres of farmland and produces 25 million kilowatt hours of low-impact Hydro Institute certified electricity. So Commissioner Perkins, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'll give you a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. Fortunately, Jenny jumped into some of the details in terms of what we're doing. I'm going to stay a little more high level and kind of go through a little background and then where we are now. So much like other rural areas in Oregon, Hood River County is prone to natural disasters due to our location in the Columbia River Gorge. And that leaves us prone to isolation, both in communications and transportation, access to transportation fuels, and in some cases, electricity. We've historically had fairly robust planning and training for response to natural disasters at the local and regional level. We've also had many real-world opportunities to test our planning. We've had fires, landslides, ice storms, snowstorms, floods, you name it, just breaks in natural gas pipelines recently, just all kinds of things that occur that allow us to test our planning. And what we've known for a really long time is that coordinating among local, state, federal, and private entities is inherently challenging. Organizations tend to be siloed and necessary relationships are not naturally developed. It's been mentioned before, you have to work to develop those relationships, and many of them aren't intuitive. You don't necessarily see the connections until you really start diving in. And so this is one of the many challenges that emergency managers within counties face. So you throw on into that energy and it inherently makes it much more complicated. So I'll step back just a little bit and talk about our energy planning that's occurred in Hood River County. So it's a subset of other planning that we've done, but it really started with the development of a group of interested folks, both from the local government perspective and also from just folks from the private sector who had a crazy level of interest in how our systems work. So these folks came together and we developed an energy plan. And I'm going to skip over a few years of hard work and frustration and trying to figure out how to make this happen. But what we ended up with was an energy plan that really looked at where we are in terms of our infrastructure, our demand, our supply, and then resilience. And we looked at all forms of energy, not just electricity. We looked at transportation fuels. We looked at electricity. We looked at natural gas, so the thermal side. And it resulted in an energy plan, which is adopted by 4 public entities, which was the City of Hood River, Hood River County, the Port of Hood River, and the Port of Cascade Locks. And that set goals for getting to where we wanted to be in terms of energy, both in terms of carbon footprint, resilience, and many other aspects. And so this is kind of where the rubber hit the road. We got our energy plan done, and then you pivot into really doing something with that. And I'll put in a plug for RARE here. We've been fortunate to use a lot of RARE participants in our community, many of whom have become permanent members of our community. We've got lots of RARE participants who are still here 10 years, 15 years after participating in the program. So yes, absolutely. If you can get a RARE participant, do it. They're well worth the time and effort. As our plan developed and we started rolling into an energy council, which is really looking at implementation, there were a number of regional, local, and national events that kind of shone a spotlight on the need for looking at your electrical infrastructure and the systems around it. A lot of them had to do with fires. You know, Oregon is prone, has been mentioned, is prone to wildfires. But we've also seen, you know, events in other parts of the country that have caused electrical system failures. But another aspect that really helped our community figure out where we wanted to go was public safety power shutoff. It was it wasn't us dealing with a fire that was right in front of us. It was dealing with something that could happen at any time in the future. And so it pushed our emergency management coordinator to really start looking at the electrical side and how that played out. And one of the huge benefits, I think, for us was having some local tabletop drills, which we worked with Pacific Power and our local co-op to run a drill that took us through what happens in the event of a public safety power shutoff. And what that really did was allow us to look at how electricity plays a role in our society. And I think we all know this to a certain level, but when you actually start diving into the details, you realize that electricity underpins almost every aspect of what we do, from emergency management to water to sewer to our economies. I mean, there's really not a piece of it that isn't touched. Cell phone towers go down, you're relying on backup power. And what we found was that backup power is not exercised frequently. Many sites you can only expect to last for a couple of hours at most. And so we started to realize how little backup power we had for our critical infrastructure around the community. And then the other was just understanding how little of our community really understands how electricity works and how electrical systems work. It's not something that most people dive into. It's something that's handled by others. Local governments, are very tied into water, wastewater, roads, those pieces of infrastructure. We don't tend to intersect with electricity. And so it's a bit of a black box. And so it's quite often left to others. And those others are the local utilities. And so we just have not had a lot of intersection there. So it's allowed us to talk about how we want our systems to function and to take a little more active role in looking at how we want those electrical systems to function, where we want to have backup power, what type of backup power we want to have, how those those critical infrastructure points affect every other aspect of our community. And we learned that we have to work really closely with our utilities and develop those relationships within the utilities to make sure that we're coordinating ahead of time. And it's taken a considerable amount of work, but it's kind of that you don't know what you don't know until you start diving into it. And then we learned that we didn't know a lot about a lot of aspects of our systems. So the question was posed, why should local governments care? This is one of the things that Energy Trust and Sustainable Northwest put towards me. And I would say you should care because it directly affects everything you do, from public safety to health, to the economy, and to every aspect of services that you deliver. If you don't have electricity, you're not going to be very effective at delivering those services. And also, if you aren't including energy in your planning for resilience, and emergency management, then you're missing a key concept that runs through absolutely everything. In terms of lessons learned, I would say number one, start now. It only gets more difficult and expensive as time goes by, so waiting is not a good thing. Cast a wide net, it's been mentioned before. Bring in as many people as you can from as many perspectives as you can. It's really amazing how many things we don't think about ahead of time. The medically fragile community is one of those that we found that we just didn't understand, and we really didn't understand how to contact them. And Pacific Power has their method of doing it, hospital has their method, but none of them are tied together, and there's HIPAA concerns. There's all kinds of things that make it difficult, but they're the most vulnerable folks in the event of a power outage. And so it's really important to have a broad array of folks at your table. Use the resources. We had a lot of local talent, just people within our community who have retired and have a lot of time on their hands and are willing to jump in and spend a ridiculous amount of time helping us go through the process. Also, your local state and federal partners, your partners at your utilities, but also the NGOs. Energy Trust has been a huge support to us through the process, and we wouldn't be where we are without the support from Energy Trust. So it's been very helpful. Sustainable Northwest, Bonneville Environmental Foundation. There's lots of folks out there that have resources in various buckets to help. Look for ways to expand your capacity within your organization. You need a dedicated person, at least one dedicated person, if not more, to get through energy planning and really make sure that it actually continues to move through all the planning processes. For us, we got creative. We were able to pull in a rare participant who then we moved into a full-time position at our regional economic development district. And it's been, if we didn't have Marla Harvey on, we never would have moved beyond just a good idea. And then just remember, it's complicated, but not insurmountable. And so you simply have to find ways to simplify the message to engage people, figure out how the idea of energy planning affects different partners, and so that they can access it and understand why it's important. And I guess the last thing I would say that I think is probably one of the more frustrating aspects is that our policy is lagging the need. The technology is advancing much faster than we're advancing policy. And if we don't figure out how to value resilience and figure out how to pay for it, we won't make progress. And so that aspect of figuring out who's going to pay for it, it's not just the infrastructure on the front end. The capital side is, I think, a little easier to pay for than the long-term O&M. And so we both need to figure out how to pay for the capital, the upfront capital, but then who's paying for the operation and maintenance, who's going to own it, who's going to operate it in terms of the microgrids, battery storage, those components. We really have got to figure that out before we can make much progress. Anyway, I want a big thank you to Energy Trust and to Sustainable Northwest for putting this together, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Perkins. I think it's a really great question that we've run into several times in terms of how you value resilience in terms of actually putting a dollar figure to that. And I know that there's some research out there, some literature that exists that does try to assign a dollar figure. Does anyone on the any of our panel experts, anyone in the room, have any resources that they'd like to share where we know that there is some literature to point to? And I think about this in terms of how we can encourage folks to invest in resilience, because the thinking is it pays back dividends. Preventative measures always pay back dividends rather than focusing on recovery. If folks have resources to point to or share, I'd really appreciate that.
Bridget, as Adam Schultz, I'll pipe up here. I don't necessarily have a resource, but just want to share my thinking here from the state's perspective on this with regard to energy resilience in particular. We really see this as a complicated issue where there are multiple value streams to energy resilience projects. And that's sort of where we're trying to apply our focus. So it's, Hood River community has a resilience value that they can get from local energy resources that can, continue the delivery of essential services during a disaster if the grid goes down, for instance. That's a real value to the community. There's also a value there from a policy perspective for the state, right? We have policy goals around local renewables and decarbonization of the grid. So there's value there to the state. And then third, there's value to the bulk energy system, to the utility grid, in helping to meet the needs of the grid on kind of a routine basis. So we're really trying to think through kind of more of a framework for how you can kind of build out systemic funding mechanisms that acknowledge and recognize those different value streams and not put it all on any one of those legs of the stool to make it work. Because I think that's can be a challenge when you try to push all that onto one entity. But then it's also a challenge to kind of work through the complexities of getting that kind of a framework in place. But that's sort of the approach we're taking. So it's a work in progress.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, if I could add, I think I was going to say something pretty similar. I think there's lots of resources out there where folks are trying to quantify resilience And depending on what perspective you're coming from and how narrow or expansive your concept is, like you can come up with that stuff. But I agree with Adam. I still think no matter what you do, you're probably going to miss either costs or benefits in that calculus, because it all depends on what you're measuring, right? So if there are benefits to the local economy by reducing your energy costs at a local or regional level, you know, are you factoring that in? It's kind of like ecosystem services, right? And trying to put a price tag on air or things like that in my mind, right? Honestly, and so you know, again, getting back to an enterprise-wide sort of approach to this, I would suggest folks, rather than, you know, trying to quantify it, make sure you've got your budget analyst in the room when you're having these conversations, so at least you know what you're measuring. And I do recognize that saying that, like for Commissioner Perkins and other decision makers out there, that's really hard, right? Because when it comes to making a policy choice, often the constituents want to know the dollars and cents answer there. But I think that's why kind of expanding our operational focus and not trying to make these decisions at such a micro level or a siloed level, and understand that there are ripple benefits. And I think all of our jobs, the people on this webinar today, is to try and communicate that to our publics in a way that describes these as more of a community benefit as opposed to a lot, you know, line item. I'll stop talking.
I would agree with you. I think it is very complicated. The reality is we can't just have a local valuation. It has to be a valuation that fits our greater grid around the state, and it has to be agreed upon in terms of who's going to pay for it. And it can't just be the local community that's paying for it. It needs to be something that if we're agreeing that resilience is something important statewide, which I think most of us have agreed upon, then it's incumbent upon us to figure out a way to have the greater system pay for those pieces that will pay dividends in the event of natural disasters. But the recognition has to be that it's going to cost us all some money on the front end in order to get to where we need to get to. And it has to be in a mechanism that works through our existing systems, which means that it has to be something that the PUC adopts and regulates. That's the only way that you're going to get to a place where it's paid for long term.
If I could add just one more thought, I think there's a short-term value proposition though that we can make, because while there are long-term benefits that are really hard for us to quantify, the if the thing happens sort of benefits, if we're doing the job right, the community should be better tomorrow regardless. And so I think that's the other value proposition we need to be making.
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again, Commissioner. It's really nice to have a community perspective, and Hood River is out in front in so many ways. And so that's a challenging place to be as a trailblazer in some regards, but we really appreciate you being here to kind of share your lessons through this. And I'll hold on to, it's complicated, but it's not insurmountable. So we're going to rotate and change gears a little bit. There's been a lot of listening, a lot of information being shared, but now we'd really like to hear from the folks in the room today that have joined us. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of expertise in this room, and we want to create a space for others to connect with folks in your community and better understand your own kind of resilience goals and needs. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so breaking out into smaller groups assigned by our geographic region. Worry not, each group will have has an assigned moderator, and this moderator will assign someone in the room to take notes. They have guiding questions that are all prepared. Someone else will take notes, and then we will come back together after about 30 minutes and report out. And what we're really hoping for is to hear what are some of the top level takeaways, what are some of the resource needs that we're hearing, if there's common themes, and better understand and prioritize where those resource needs are. So let's see here. Please give us just 1 to 2 minutes as we assign everyone or get everyone to your rooms, and bear with us. And then I'll send a note out via the chat box when we'll go ahead and get started. So at this moment, I will go ahead and pull up a slide here. And if folks are Zoom savvy and you have the ability to move yourself into a room that, let's see here, bear with me. Oh, there we go. So here's our breakout rooms. And so you can see we've got folks in different geographic regions. So if all goes well, we'll start getting you to your rooms shortly. If you have any challenges or questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Ben Dare or Jordan Drebin with Sustainable Northwest, and we'll get everyone to where they need to go. So let's give this a go.
Doesn't look like I've been sent to my breakout room.
Okay, we will move some folks around just shortly. Give us just 1 minute.
Hi, Bridget. Can I get moved to 6 or 7?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
And Brian, I'm sorry, which room are you in?
I was in 10, which I see has Multnomah as well, but it was all folks from Eugene area. So
Okay.
I was wondering if I can go to 6 or 7.
Sure thing.
I was a similar situation. I'm actually from the city of Portland. It sounded like he was talking about west of Washington County and other places. So if possible, I guess 6 or 7 is where I should go.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Let's go ahead and say Portland metro area. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, I work for the city of Portland. Yep.
Okay, great. I'll send you right over. Okay, Jordan, I'm gonna head over to room 1.
Okay.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going? Oh, I'm going someplace.
Hello.
Hi, Jordan.
How are
Hey,
you?
I'm late to joining. Looks like there's some breakout rooms going on.
Yeah. When I look at the list, you're assigned to room 0 with me. So I'm not sure where I'm supposed to send you, other than keep you here.
Okay. How much time is left on the breakout rooms?
They just left, so probably another 15 minutes.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
I can ask,
I will.
I can text Bridget if you want to go to a breakout room.
No, that's fine. I'll just hang tight. Everybody coming back here at some point?
Yeah, come back at 11:35.
Okay, I'll just probably mute and stop video and until then. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks.
Bye.
Okay, welcome back, folks. We'll give it just a minute for everyone to join. So what's going to happen next? I'm going to call room by room. So hopefully the folks know who took notes, is reporting out, and we'll have a little bit of a lightning round, just about 1 to 2 minutes per room to share out kind of top level themes or takeaways. And we're also really interested in if there's been some kind of consensus around resource needs, whether that's funding, that's technical assistance, that's capacity, it's leadership, data collection. We'd like to hear it. So let's go ahead and start with room number 1, which I was a part of. And this room really was part of the Mid-Columbia Economic Development District group. So the kind of Columbia Gorge region. And Annika, thank you very much for taking notes. Why don't you go ahead and share it? Oh, and real quickly, Jordan Drebin from our team is going to be taking notes and capturing all this information. And we will be sharing this out to everyone who joined today. So Annika, please share with us.
Great. So when we talked about the question of what projects with no constraints, they kind of fell into 2 categories: planning and then also project development. So we talked about, in terms of planning, like how do we integrate the idea of adding solar plus storage microgrids into upcoming projects? How do we get that on the table? And then in terms of project development, we talked about, wanting to do more microgrid development, wanting to look into hydro more, and undergrounding utilities was another area that we discussed. And then finally, another thing that kind of I think was a theme throughout was the idea of how do we unlock more funding from FEMA to help support some of these things. So those were our project ideas. And then when we talked about resource needs, we talked about money. We need money to fund all these things. They're big, expensive projects. How do we find that? Capacity is associated with that, but we spent a good amount of time talking about how it's really difficult to move projects forward where the burden is sort of put on someone like an emergency manager who is so busy with other things. How are they supposed to provide attention to something like this? So how can we filter capacity from the state down to the local level where implementation is happening? And then another thing we talked about in terms of resource needs was data. How can we really get a better understanding of where our vulnerable communities are? That's been really challenging because of the confidentiality requirements. Then finally, from our discussion of who's missing at the table, we really focused on vulnerable communities not being at the table, having difficulty getting them to the table. So those who are economically disadvantaged, those who maybe have English as a second language, how do we really involve them more in the process without also putting a burden on them? So that's what we talked about. Did I miss anything, group? Great.
You did an excellent job, Annika. Thank you. So we'll move to room 2, and Karen Appler with Energy Trust of Oregon was moderating. Karen, who is note taker and responsible for reporting out?
Well, that's also me. we had a smaller room, so I did my best to guide conversation and take some notes so we could have a fully developed conversation. We were similar to room 1. I think if the roof was lifted off and the sky was the limit, it was really about bringing folks together from all perspectives and really ensuring that the planning process thought of all the details and included all the stakeholders that would be necessary. And also, it was, we were talking, I think we kept coming back to energy because of, it was myself and Susan Badger-Jones and that connection, but really speaking from the resiliency topic, the next thing that we centered on was not just about the ability for communities to communicate during natural hazard events. What we realized in Eastern Oregon is that it's a very broken process. Norm Simone, who's in our group, brought up a study that I think would be beneficial to send out to folks in our service region. So there's a better understanding of what those barriers might be and considerations for projects that should be incorporated in natural hazard mitigation plans. And also just an awareness of how the timeline of those natural hazard mitigation plan work is going and how that work flows into the work that folks are doing that are participating in this workshop. I know at Energy Trust are trying to kind of raise the awareness of where communities are in the phases of those plans. But I think it's really important for the members of that community to understand where that planning process is taking place so they can participate in that. And we agree that that would be a strategy. Another was just really raising awareness of microgrid technology and having that conversation with the utilities and also with the community, you know, what it is, what it does not do. And then we also talked about the capacity with people and expertise to get the work done, and also capacity in the system. So if you are bringing renewable projects online, do you have capacity in the system to put them on?
Great, thanks, Karen. And I've received a few notes in my inbox already, and that's quite all right if they're rough notes. Don't worry about that. Just send them our way and we will clean them up and send them out. Okay, so room 3. Who do we have for room 3? Karen Chase, representing folks in Southern Oregon.
Yes, well, we had a great group, and thankfully I'm not the note taker and reporter outer. That is Amy, and thank you, Amy, for doing that for us.
You're welcome. So, surprise, cat's out of the bag. I actually work remotely out of Klamath Falls in Southern Oregon, and my office is based out of Salem, Oregon. So for group number 3, we had really good discussions. We had an environmental specialist, which was awesome to have in a group setting. The overall themes that we saw or discussed were community outreach and just basically limited resources, especially in smaller communities. Another theme for in a perfect world, if we did have funding, what would we start today? There was a good discussion regarding individual drought retention projects, meaning recycling gray water resources to support implementing infrastructure for those local communities, and even community outreach in general. Again, I'm going to keep reiterating that throughout this discussion or my brief out. The capacity again for overall smaller communities, even for a wildfire, there was an example that there was wildfires going on in other areas in Southern Oregon, and a smaller community didn't have but 15 people, boots on ground, to assist with kind of managing what was going on in that community. So just overall community capacity during a disaster and post-disaster. And then renewable energy infrastructure, if we did have more money in this area, implementing more solar, possibly wind, depending on the area within Southern Oregon to make it more resilient. And basically overall arching concept was basically self-sufficiency, to increase self-sufficiency for those communities, especially with the rural areas that are spread out throughout Southern Oregon. And then for that, how in regards to the question regarding COVID and how it highlighted the overall vulnerability and lack of resiliency in our area, I would say, based upon the conversation that we had in our group, community involvement and outreach during this type of disaster, which ties right into the human process structures. We really need to work on networking and collaborating as a whole, with identifying those subject matter experts and linking them up to those individuals that are seeking assistance or may need that assistance. And then just not enough infrastructure for linking up experts and knowing who to call again. And then the bubble effect. It's really easy to live in a small community and not see, specifically with COVID, having numbers increase around the state around you, but not maybe so much in your own community. So there was a silo bubble effect going on that was discussed as well in a few of the communities. That's all I have for group 3. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Amy. So we'll move to group 4. Rob Delmar with Oregon Department of Energy was moderating this group representing Central Oregon. Rob, do you want to share out or share with us who was your note taker?
So our note taker was Sienna, and I will let her share what we discussed.
Yeah, so we discussed for the first question what we do if we had no restraints. The first part of the conversation went to some more specific projects like supporting vulnerable populations to be 2 weeks prepared, especially the elderly and those with medical conditions that would be particularly vulnerable during evacuation or power outage. And generally speaking, individual household preparedness. Most of the discussion was dominated by COIC staff. So we're talking about, what we do in our department. And part of our area of experience is community building, and using individual household preparedness as a tool of community building is something that fits in with what we're doing already. So that seems like something that we would be capable of taking on. That, and also it supports the governor's goals for making 250,000 households 2 weeks ready. And then broadly speaking about resilience, we're trying to build out a resilience program from our department currently, and we're looking to take a regional level approach. And I really liked what Amy said about increasing coordination and collaboration among existing partner agencies, linking experts, just kind of taking in what the landscape is currently, and then trying to work from there, which is not super specific and not super directly tied to energy resilience, but I think inevitably energy resilience would come out of that. Another specific project that Rob had brought up was this Regional Emergency Services and Coordination Center that is being worked on with several agencies and county folks to support. And the Emergency Operations Center would definitely benefit from some solar and batteries to keep it powered, as that's going to be the landing pad for most of the west side of the state in the event of a Cascadia event. So, as well as generally supporting vulnerable communities and neighborhoods in communities of Central Oregon that would benefit from some projects like this, just to improve quality of life in some of the smaller and less advantaged areas. I also added some food systems resilience projects would probably benefit from some additional energy support, especially when it comes to distribution and storage and that sort of thing. We talked about resources that we would need to help pursue these different projects. Technical assistance was up there, is pretty high. We, as COIC, don't currently have the expertise to do some of this work, but we would really like to, and learning from our partners and building partnerships that can help us make this stuff happen is really critical. So building partnerships is also part of that. Funding, that's an important component, especially for sustainability of some of these bigger projects that would need long-term funding. Capacity, that's an issue across all rural communities, but definitely for projects like this, if we're bringing it into a smaller city. And then missing data, knowing where the existing assets are and vulnerabilities and trying to get the full picture is really critical. And then we only got to the first 3 questions. The last one was current projects that we have in mind. I already mentioned the ResCC project, and then Rob brought up the, the grid web demo project in Eugene, and something like that being potentially a model for bringing into Madras as they're building a community center. So that could be brought into that. So I'll leave it there.
Great. That's a hearty list. We'll look forward to kind of combining all of these and see where there's a lot of overlap. Thanks for sharing, Sienna. So we're going to move to room 5. Adam Schultz, Oregon Department of Energy, was moderating. And so Adam, you were the note taker. Top level takeaways.
I actually wasn't the note taker. Sierra was the note taker for us. If she wants to report out for us, I'd be happy to summarize, but she has the notes in front of her.
Yeah, I can report out if everybody can hear me okay.
Yeah.
So I heard a lot of the same stuff that we talked about. For the resiliency projects, the focus was mostly on water. It sounded like a lot of water people were in the room. So water connectivity throughout Lincoln County, electrical resiliency, projects to support those. There were some folks that brought up wildfire risk and backing up the grid, clearing evacuation routes and alternate transportation for clogged arteries, so like those main arteries that come in and out of your bigger cities. I brought up the communication coordination projects of state resources for county availability. That was basically a summary of the first question. The second question for resources, it was staff. Everybody had the same wish to either train staff or fund new positions or fund coordination throughout the state, throughout the region, excuse me. Training to identify responsibilities in disaster response and public outreach and communication, those kinds of resources. Josh brought up a really important component of technical assistance to help coordinate regional resources. He also, I think he should talk a little bit about this because it was really useful, kind of adopting that business resiliency is business as usual, integrating it into all of the training for all staff, not just preparedness staff. And then emphasizing that all hazards approach and not honing in on just one hazard, but really considering all the things that could go wrong during a disaster, for whatever disaster. And then the last question, players at the table for planning. The emphasis was regional again. Josh also brought up budget analysts, so that's kind of a thing that we forget to think about, making sure that we're being fiscally responsible. And then I brought up needing a leader to drive those planning groups. It's so important to have someone you trust and you respect in order to drive that, for them to drive that process and get things moving forward. And the last bit was communication to the community and getting the interest and investment and the importance of preparedness.
Great. And I'm seeing more and more notes hitting my inbox. So thank you, everyone. We're going to move quickly to room 6, which is Lee Rahr was moderating with Sustainable Northwest. So Lee, were you wanting to report out or who in your room?
Thanks, Bridget. I have Brian, who helped us from Multnomah County, take notes, and he's going to report out as well. Brian?
Thanks. Yeah, Brian Eberhardt, Multnomah County Drainage District, actually a special district, not the county, just for people because it's a common mistake. But we had the questions, the 2 categories for like in a perfect world, what we would do, kind of broke out into statewide and then kind of more local. So statewide, moving the community energy infrastructure hub, I believe is what it's called, in the Portland Willamette River area, getting it away from the river, out of the city, into a less hazardous area was a priority. Also kind of looking more statewide into the rural areas. There were a member in our group was kind of focused on that. So drought resilience through managing water demand, soil health, and energy self-sufficiency. Those all came up. Locally, levee investments, wildfire planning would be a higher focus in the metro area, and floodplains. Climate action plans are also in the works. So those are some of our priority topic areas. Regarding capacity or limitations, Mike from Oregon's hazard resiliency officer, he mentioned the legislatures have a hard time thinking long-term or beyond kind of the 1 to 2 year budget cycle. So emphasizing, having local people voices there to speak up for and advocate for long-term mitigation planning was really important. Capacity, of course, for staffing, both for outreach to the community, but also for implementation and planning efforts. Having adequate local funds to be able to get federal investments is a barrier that was identified. And then one idea that came up that I thought was definitely worth bringing up is having more funding and emphasis at for some state agencies such as the Oregon Department of Agriculture, Oregon Department of Water Resources and Environmental Quality for how they can help with soil and water health will making our communities more resilient, what were all mentioned. And then we got one question about who's not at the table that should be. Special districts, including them within county planning is a barrier sometimes. I thought that was a good point from our group. I said bringing in power utility companies during the planning process. I think Les Perkins mentioned that earlier about having them there for their input on logistics as well as their dollars, or maybe getting that local match is a good idea for energy resiliency. And then an idea that's even bigger was just like building social capital, which is hard to quantify and how to do it, but how do we help our communities to help themselves and be more self-sufficient? Building social capital was an idea that came up. So especially for maybe more affluent neighborhoods or communities to help more disadvantaged or vulnerable communities. Thanks.
That's great, Brian. Thank you. So we're going to move swiftly over to room 7, which was moderated by Ben Dare with Sustainable Northwest, and also representing the greater Portland metro area.
I was really lucky to have a bunch of folks from Clackamas. Thank you for joining, and as well as Jenny Hall, who will call an honorary member of Clackamas. So the desires really are for a whole bunch of things in energy and land management. Solar plus storage, underground utilities, restoration after wildfires that takes into account future weather and drought, as well as restoration of buildings that takes into account future hazards such as floods and wildfires, building back in a way that saves money and accounts for future generations. We had some really interesting discussions about network and civic processes, how there's existing channels like various commissions and committees, and thinking about how to strengthen that and how to build community. There are other tables for conversation and forums for governance, like the forest collaboratives, that don't have formal resources for staff like they might in Washington State. Others like fire departments, other service providers that already have really tight margins, even compared to the services they provide, and especially the demands placed on their people and their staff. That also leads into social vulnerability, talking about an energy trust effort to measure and prioritize social vulnerability. Our Rare talked about keeping in mind the historical and structural inequalities and divisions that make it really difficult to connect. Even if we have good intentions, it's still a challenge. And then 2020, it wasn't just COVID, it was the wildfires, the ice storm, multiple events, sharing personal anecdotes about what it's like to not have air conditioning and what happens when you're opening your windows at night to cool your house. Just empathizing also what it must be like to have asthma or other vulnerabilities in a condition like that. And then finally, programs we're using, the Municipal Wildfire Assistance Program through Business Oregon, and the Justice 40 Accelerator through the Biden administration. Am I getting everything? I think that's everything. Just shake your head, waggle your hands. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, we're nearing the Friday at noon hour. So we're going to move quickly over to room 8, which was Alinka, who was moderating our panel.
Yeah, Lindsay actually took notes for us and will be reporting out for this group.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay. We're down in Curry, Coos, and Douglas counties for room 8. So in our perfect world with no funding or capacity limits, we talked about coordinated centers with resources in the events of emergencies. So whether that's a large emergency evacuation center for these regions or something that's just more connected as a broad group, so that in the event that a smaller group with not as many resources can't get there, there's still a plan. And then also energy backup plans. We weren't as well versed in what our municipalities were doing about the energy backups, whether there's generators or not, but also if they did have generators, what the fuel sources and stuff would be if they even had those. So we talked about energy backup as also a perfect, no limit. And then what resources would help us in the resiliency planning? Partnerships in a lot of the rural areas. Sometimes there can be kind of, I guess political is not the right word, but there could be barriers that bar people from maybe wanting to work together. So I don't know if recruiting some outside of the area partnerships would maybe be a solution to that. Also technical and broadband assistance, giving people the access to work, if they don't even have computers or the ability to open documents. Also getting them educated on the systems they might need to do these things. I know that in Curry County specifically, we tend to have retirement communities. And so during COVID, online meetings just weren't accessible for most of our citizens. Regardless of if they have the technology, it just becomes a lot harder to access it. And then accessing things like, city council meetings and stuff in these times have been hard to, not necessarily, some places can coordinate that and make it work, but others can't. And so making sure that people have this education and the access to these systems. And then also consistent and coordinated leadership, having someone working to connect and find these resources. Because in a lot of these areas, it's, not necessarily there. And so making sure that that's established and there's somebody to connect to these systems, I guess. And then we didn't really have any specific community resiliency projects, but one thing we discussed was capital projects for water infrastructure improvements, also just other utility improvements in case of disasters. So whether that's power or water, those are most of my notes. I don't know, I might have missed something, but that's what I have.
That's great, Lindsay. Thank you. So we're rounding out room number 9. Matt Getchell with Energy Trust of Oregon was moderating this panel representing Mid-Willamette Valley.
Yeah, and I'm going to pass it over to Stephen with OEM for notes and report out.
Yeah, the hard part about being number 9 is there's already so many great ideas and innovative discussions already occurring. So hopefully we'll get into that group. So we talked about, in a perfect world, what are some of the things that we would need to be looking at, and kind of the restraints and different projects. And there's a lot of discussion about just looking at the vulnerable and underrepresented communities, whether that again is language access or just that community having access to utility infrastructure or things like that. In an emergency, how do we notify them? And areas like that. We also talked about different specific like wildfire mitigation and how mitigation projects can kind of intertwine into something else. If we do a wildfire field mitigation, does that prevent wildfire, which can affect the different rivers and streams? Now we have water quality issues and things like that. So it is a trickle effect and something that we really need to have a focus on. We looked at resources, and one of the things that came up was some sort of a hub, a collaboration type of a hub that we can have resources, whether it's citywide, regionally, even statewide. What is out there that we're able to tap into? And that came into the funding piece. There's funding that's out there, but sometimes that funding can leave gaps. The certain structure that a certain grant is brought into or certain legislative concept, it might cover a piece or pieces, but the holistic project or the holistic issue can still have some gaps. So identifying ways forward with some of that gap funding to be able to help some of these communities. When we talk about funding sources, one of the things that we looked at was special districts and just special, whether it's a special utility district, but having those cities and communities know who's in your backyard. The fires, I know that really there were a lot of special districts that were not in their plans, and discussion about how as a city, as a county, as a state, who do we have that's in here, and are we including them in our hazard mitigation plans or multi-jurisdictional plans, so that when something happens, not if, but when, we have that access to FEMA funding, because that is a huge piece of it. And is that community even prepared? Thus that planning piece. As far as other questions, call to action, again, just kind of went into that planning piece of it. But when we talk about how COVID has impacted it, if you think about it, when all the wildfires and the recent ice storm happened, our traditional way of managing a crisis didn't work, because we're not able to meet in one room, roll out a map, and assign different tasks. So it was a lot of innovative thinking. I think we did a decent job at it, but I think COVID has definitely changed the way that we respond. We have this telework process, which means there's more emphasis on broadband technology and things like that. COVID also highlighted the disproportionate issues to those underrepresented communities, like so many disasters do. So having that equity lens to be able to focus and to outreach to them is key. And then lastly, just the mental health impact. We're all wanting to help. We're great public servants, but we also need to maintain our own mental health and watch that of our team, and make sure that they're able to perform to the standard they need to. But if they need to take a break, make sure that's prioritized. That's it.
Thanks, Stephen. I really appreciate that. And certainly in terms of if there's redundancies, it's also helpful for us to capture that, because these are the themes that are kind of rising to the top, and that's what we're hoping to glean. And really appreciate this perspective that the COVID crisis is a completely different crisis that required different solutions and strategies than anything we've seen before. So it's a valuable lesson and perspective. So we're going to move over, last but not least. I think it was a smaller room than we had anticipated. So I appreciate Titus stepping up, Titus Tomlinson with the RARE program for a more intimate conversation, I think, with just a few folks. Is that right? So Titus, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, it was definitely a small group. It was just me and Ken. And we talked really about what's going on in Washington County. And I'm going to try to make this rapid fire, because I know we're hungry and we want to get to lunch. So with regards to that first question about thinking big, floodplain mitigation is the big thing that's on Ken's mind right now. So we talked about everything from property buyouts to construction related mitigation, so on and so on. So moving down to resources, obviously we're going to continue on with this theme of funding and capacity. And one really interesting thing that we chatted about was how often funding comes and it's just project oriented. We're not funding capacity, and there has to be the melding of two in order to bring the money in for the projects, but then you got to have the staffing ultimately to take that funding and do something with it. And it was really interesting to hear that that's just as much the case in Washington County as it is out in Lake County. So really a statewide issue. With regards to community resilience, this is actually really interesting because, again, it comes back to capacity. Ken's the emergency management, I want to say, coordinator for Washington County. And he has been so busy over the course of the last year and a half with COVID that he can't, like the lack of capacity to plan forward has been a limiting factor. So when we talked about these, like, I don't even know where to start right now because I've been so much in the response mode. Questions that Ken still has, we had a really interesting conversation about what resources are out there with regards to resilient building, both in like the construction arena as well as infrastructure arena. And so that was a resource need, absolutely. And then the last thing that I want to throw out there is we talked a little bit about how COVID highlighted some of those community vulnerabilities. And for Ken, it was, and I think we're seeing this across the state right now, which is to say, we have a better sense of where our vulnerable populations live and exist. And these are maybe communities that we had not recognized potentially at all pre-COVID. So that is one of the things that COVID had highlighted, is just the array of vulnerable communities that exist within Washington County, now how they need to be a little bit more thoughtful about how they support and serve those communities. And I'll leave it at that. And Ken, please chime in if I missed anything.
Well, that was really helpful. Thanks, Titus. I really appreciate you keeping that conversation going. So I just want to start and say the breadth and depth of what we've been hearing today is pretty incredible and really shows a testament to all the work everyone in this room is doing. And, you know, we're really honored that all of you would take time out of your busy schedule to join us today. So I know that we're kind of nearing the lunch hour. Don't want to take too much more of everyone's time before we go, hopefully stretch a little bit and refuel as we need to. I just want to wrap up and say, I really appreciate everyone coming here. I really want to give a shout out to Energy Trust of Oregon as the co-host of this event. I also want to thank specifically the RARE program. I think that your ears must all be burning because both the RARE staff as well as the RARE service members, former and current, is really inspiring. So thank you for supporting this. And also thank you to Oregon Department of Energy, always lending your expertise to these events. I shared this before, but this event was recorded. We will send out slides from what you've heard today. A lot of good resources have been shared. And we also will send out speaker bios, speaker contact information. So if you want to follow up with folks, you can. Again, we are going to send out names and email addresses of folks who attended, just to keep this conversation going. Last but not least, please fill out the survey. It'll take no more than 3 minutes. You can do it while you're eating lunch, but it will really help us get a better sense of, was this valuable? Were there things that we were missing? Is there some value in continuing to grow these conversations and these resources and these strategies as a state? And if this is something worth hosting annually. I know there are a lot of folks that wanted to be here today or folks that we weren't able to reach. And so, you know, there's a lot more opportunity there. So thank you again for your time. Thank you again to Sustainable Northwest and our staff for supporting this. I really hope everyone is able to take some time off this weekend and take care of ourselves. So thank you. And we will look forward to continuing this conversation down the road.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And if anyone's willing to stay on for just a second with your camera on, we're hoping to get a group shot just to be able to share with our audience and spread the word about resilience. So that would be really helpful. And I'll just wait until I get everybody who's available to turn on their camera, do so. Okay, and if everyone will take a quick smile. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that. That'll look great.
Thanks, Jordan. We'll go ahead and leave the Zoom room open for a little bit of time if you want to capture any of the chat, if you want to capture anything else, connect with folks. But thank you again and look forward to seeing you all down the road.
Have a great day.